explanations of why Nazca are an amazing nation, and I have set up some just examples of the tricks that I at times pull in the games, especially for a later game. Um, this is mostly just to showcase late game magic and to see how powerful Nazca can be given enough research. I mean, I guess any nation can be powerful given enough research, but for Nazca, the power, in my opinion, comes relatively early, plus you can tailor it to your enemy. So, for example, this province will be going over here. I will be using Earthquake. As such, I have two of my cap-only mages set up to first cast Communion Master, which plugs them into a Communion. This ensures that they get power boost per two, or rather not two, but per squared number of slaves in the Communion. So, for example, these two Huron priests will cast Communion Slave. This plugs them into the Communion as slaves. For having two of them be Communion slaves, my any Communion Master in this Communion gets a +1 to every magic path. If we had 4 of these Communion slaves, they would get +2 to their magic path. If we had 8, they would get a +3. If we had 16, they would get a +4. If we had a 32, they would get a +5, and I believe that is the max you can have. So we have 2 Communion slaves, simply making it easier to cast Earthquake, and the Communion Masters first become a master, then they summon Earth Power, which increases their power in the Earth School by 1. So this one will get boosted to 3 by casting Earth Power, and get boosted to 4 by casting by being in the Communion with 2 slaves. This one gets boosted to 4 and then 5 respectively. I gave each of them 8 Earth Gems. I believe you can give them less. The Earthquake spell requires 3 Earth Gems. I just give them extra to save myself on the testing. I'm sure you can get away with probably 6. But the extra 2 gems help them use an extra gem on top of the 3 every time they cast the spell to reduce fatigue. They effectively raise their level by another 1, and it reduces fatigue for them. And this guy is just here to lead the troops, which will be just holding and attacking. Nothing fancy. So I'm sending them over there. This group, it does seem like I have a lot of guys here, but honestly, for a late game army, this is not that big. You can quite reasonably expect to have this many in a late game army, or even mid game really. This only has 3 cap only mages. I don't count this guy because he mostly is there to lead the troops. You can have really any leader, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Communion slaves. I took the 8 because it gives you that +3 to the path of the Communion Masters. So the Huron priests are only here to be Communion slaves. That's all of them are set to do that. The Koyas are set to. This one is set to become a master, summon Earth Power, because Earth Power gives reinvigoration to all the Communion slaves, which means these guys will keep losing fatigue every turn, extra fatigue. In Dominions 5, they made fatigue loss every turn. The reinvigoration increases that further. And then the priest casts, the Koya casts Power of the Spheres. It increases her paths by 1. This also goes for the slaves, which helps them fatigue less, because the higher the slaves' paths, the less fatigue they receive for when they're a slave. And then the Koya is just spamming Horde of Skeletons. Well, it's spamming it twice and then casting whatever spells it feels like, because that's how many you can script. This Koya does Communion Master, Power of the Spheres, again to raise itself, really. One power of the reason I said Summon Earth Power is cast for the sake of the slaves is because any spell that is cast on the caster, by the caster, obviously, is proliferated towards the slaves. So this Koya casts Summon Earth Power, all the slaves get the effect. This Koya casts, again, Area of Effect caster spell, then it proliferates again to the slaves, which gives them all a boost in the path. This Koya casting it a second time is redundant, but it does boost her own path, which means easier to spam Horde of Skeletons because she will have an extra Death Mage level on top of everything else, really, on top of the Communion. And this Koya is doing the same thing again. It's Communion Master, Power of the Spheres, spamming Horde of Skeletons. Basically, this is you spamming Horde of Skeletons. You can obviously have way more Communion Masters. I just settled for 3 because after they're done spamming skeletons, you also get to see the random magics that they decide to do, which pretty good actually. This guy is just there to lead a tiny bit of troops. Honestly, you would never engage an enemy with so few troops. This is just to showcase that having a really small army and 3 guys spamming skeletons with adequate slaves will get you through life. Then we have these guys. They are... These Malkuth priests can reanimate undead, so I had a bunch of them reanimate up a bunch of undead. Ignore these 3,000 undead up top, they're not participating. The ones that are participating are these guys. 180, 180, 180, 136, and 72. It's a lot of undead, but quite honestly, you can have this many there. Like, throughout the game, you will lose these guys. They will become the Malkuth priests. You can, instead of making them research, you can set them to reanimate undead. It starts adding up quite quickly, I assure you. So the skeletons are given no battle orders, they'll just run and attack. The undead Malkuth priests leading them are also given no battle orders, they'll just cast random spells. However, I do have these 4 Huron priests acting as communion slaves for this Huron priest. This is because he's set to become a communion master, so he gets the +2 to his paths from the 4 slaves. Then he has a skull staff, which bumps him up to 3 from his original 2. So with the slaves, he would have 5. Then he casts Power of the Spheres to get himself 6, just for good measure, really. And then he casts Darkness. Darkness requires 4 Death Gems and Death Magic level 2. The mistake I made when I was testing this, and I figure I should let all Nazca players know this, because first of all, this changed from Dominions 4. Second of all, I fell into the trap. I assume some people who watch this will think, wow, you're an idiot, you should know this. But I figure maybe somebody will appreciate the tip nonetheless. I first tried having some of these guys be the communion slaves for him, because again, in Dominions 4 you could. Unfortunately, they have the innate spellcaster, which makes them unable to be communion slaves of any kind. So this guy cast Communion Master, which did nothing. Then he cast Power of the Spheres, which gave him over 100 fatigue. So he spent some time thinking about his life choices and recovering fatigue. And after he was done recovering fatigue, he tried to cast Darkness, but because it gives you 400 fatigue, He kills himself, darkness doesn't get cast, and I wonder what the heck's going on. It took me like 3 test runs, actually more, don't judge me, to figure out that it's these guys' fault for not being adequate slaves. So I have these instead. These guys will just run over here, I suppose. Then I have these 3 guys. This is a... I'm sure there's people who came up with this on my own, but I'm just really happy that I figured this out, but I don't think I read it anywhere. I might have. Credit to whoever gave me the idea, I suppose. No, not intending on stealing it or anything. These guys are equipped with a death staff, skull staff, to give them 3 death. And they're equipped with Eye of the Void for the 2 penetration bonus and a spell focus for the 1 penetration bonus. You can avoid having either or both of these items. I have them just because it increases their effectiveness, but again, really, you can just have the skull staff, it's fine. What they are doing is casting Winds of Death twice. I think I actually should give them a bit more death gems. Yeah, there we go. 6 and 6. There we go. And now it says they can cast it twice, and then just some placeholder troops on hold and attack rear just to make them just stall for time while these guys cast, because it takes them the casting time. Again, change from the minions 4. Before it was slightly faster and more effective, but it still works quite well. So they will just go over here. You'll see what happens. The Wind of Death spell, it basically makes the enemy units age really quickly if they fail the magic resistance check. So what happens is they have to, each unit on the battlefield has to pass 6 magic resistance checks or start aging really quickly, which kills most units. And then finally here, we have, again, Horn Priests acting as communion slaves. Really, these guys are great for communion slaving. Now, this is not the most optimal way of doing it. I mean, it works to give your Incas a crystal matrix to allow them to get plugged into the communion, because they don't have the astral to cast the communion master spell. The crystal matrix makes them a master at the start of the fight. And again, the issue I had was because they are a master at the very start of the fight and they don't have to cast communion master, you have to give them some random spell to waste their time on, like air shield for example, while these guys cast communion slave. Because if I had folk warriors first, and my first test I did, my mistake again, changes from Dominions 4 confuse me sometimes still, then he tries to, while these guys are preparing, because of the casting time, the communion slave spell, he also tries to prepare the fog warrior spell, can't, and then just switches to casting random spells, and then he never tries it again, because as soon as he realizes he can't, he doesn't go back to that part of the script. So they will just attack there. So yeah, we're going to have 5 battles, and let's end our turn. Man, just to show off, Man is patrolling with a bunch of units in provinces. In this one province, I am using Spearmen instead of the other ones that are using the Tower Guard. The reason I am using the Spearman is because they have less protection. I would have used the Tower Guard, but this is the group I'm using to showcase the Earthquake, and don't use Earthquake on units with protection higher than like 9 or 10, because it does rather negligible damage, and you're just kind of wasting the spells that your mage could otherwise be casting instead of the Earthquake. That's basically it. So let's end the turn and then host so it resolves the battles. My computer's relatively fast, so it shouldn't take too long despite a lot of fighting. Excellent. So let's go as man and let's see what happens. Right, so this is the first fight we're looking at. This is, I believe, the one that he is casting Fog Warriors. Fog Warriors will turn all of my units in, give them the fog thing. Basically, when they're hit with non-magical weapons, every hit will do exactly 1 damage. So each of them has to get hit 11 times to die. So it's a pretty effective spell. So there, oops, just pause for a second. See how they're all ghostly and they have the mist form? While the state is being very difficult to harm, all attacks will only do 1 point of damage. It ends if struck by exceptionally hard blow, and I believe it also ends if struck by magic. So if the enemy was spamming AoE spells, that would help against this particular tactic. It's still nonetheless a good tactic you can use as Nazca, especially if you have a much bigger army than this. Making all of your guys unhittable is, well, not unhittable, but take almost no damage is quite effective. And the guy that cast it only suffered 11 fatigue, and the guys that were the slaves for him only suffered 68 fatigue. So here's what happens during a fight. I'll be fast forwarding quite a bit, but as you can tell, they're fighting. There we go, let's see. Yeah, see all the ones appearing? Yeah. The actual big numbers are my units, and these more visible ones are the ones that lost the effect because they got hit so hard. However, overall, these should all be dead by now because the Nazcan spearmen are not the strongest units. They only have 8 protection, decent defense, but only 8 protection, so they would die quite quickly to these hits, if not for the fact that they only take 1 damage a hit, and these guys are just spamming some random spells. So, yep, the spearmen are just sitting there hitting. These guys are trying to rout. Ah, we actually lost. Well, this didn't happen in the test. Still, just go with it. It's effective. Terrible, terrible example of a test, but these tower guards should have completely shredded through my spearmen with way more than simply 71 losses, and they should have done it turns and turns ago. In fact, I think the reason we routed is actually the Incas sometimes just fail a morale check. I had that during the test. The battle is going great for my side. Incas just decide to fail a morale check. None of the other guys do it, just the Incas, but the Inca runs away, the Huron priests get a lot of fatigue, get stunned, are unhappy, start routing. Maybe I misunderstood what was happening, but yeah. Anyways, and this will be our Earthquake test. This is the spearmen from Shandlands, basically they're spearmen. So we have our Koyas doing their Commune Master. They're boosted slightly by the slaves. Fast forwarding. And then they cast Earthquake once. A number of these guys died. They cast Earthquake a second time, each of them, and a large chunk of them died. And they started routing because most of them failed a morale check, and as well I think their commanders also took a pretty big hit. So that's Earthquake, and while my Huron priests died because of the fatigue that they suffered from being slaves, the Koyas killed almost 200 units from the Earthquakes that they cast and the follow-up spells, and we only lost 33 spearmen. because the enemy was too busy routing to really fight them. However, Earthquake should really be used on units with probably even less protection than Spearmen, and while you might think there's not that many of them, most mages actually have terrible protection, so this tactic would work quite well if the enemy commanders were low protection, like, not 18. And also, the reason we only lost 33 spearmen is because they're all flying, so they're immune to the earthquake. Alright, so next we have our gigantic undead army. This is basically you steamrolling the enemy with sheer numbers as Nazca. Now, please note how the tower guards have 13 attack and 17 defense, so these Undead with only 11 attack and 9 defense should have a really bad time against them. Granted, there's probably enough to win anyways, but they should still have a lot of trouble. However, as soon as Darkness is cast, these guys don't have Dark Vision, so they go to 7 attack and 11 defense because of the -6 Darkness modifier, which makes the undead just completely steamroll them. I'm fast forwarding here, and yeah, these guys just decided their lives are worth more than this battle. In the end, we did lose a pretty sizable chunk of the undead. However, we killed most of the tower guards, and all of our mages survived intact. And I assure you, like, having this many undead as Nazca is quite possible. It's not out of the ordinary, as if you obviously go for having enough priests to reanimate them. Now, this is the we're spamming undead and random spells battle. So here they buff up, they start making some undead. Undead are losing quite handily, but here comes the spells. So we're casting Gifts from Heaven, which have terrible accuracy but hit everything, but kill basically everything that they hit. So you'll be seeing some meteors fall. Yep, they just 100 something damage on the square. Just kills anything. This guy is casting some fire magic. Everybody's on fire. And they are casting Vortex of Undeath because the skeletons don't care. They're casting Gifts from Heaven. They're raising more undead. And these guys just get bogged down in skeletons. Please don't ruin this test for me by winning. This is not how the test battles go. Okay, we win. We did lose some units because they actually finally got to us. However, we still won the battle with only 20 losses, and we started with 31 units to their 370. If you had like any actual amount of units to hold the line, your mages would have completely decimated the enemy army. Decimated only means kill every 10th. They would have completely destroyed the enemy army. And finally, we have my personal favorite. Now, these guys, I didn't send them to retreat after they finish casting, but there's a pretty good chance that they die anyways. Yeah, like they got affected by their own decaying effect. You could probably up their magic resistance with having another one cast spells to increase it, and giving them an item or two to increase it, so they actually survive this. However, this is just as an example of a suicide run, and see how most of the enemy army is purple. I mean, granted, these guys do have only 10 magic resistance, but with this amount of penetration, even if they had more magic resistance, a pretty sizable chunk of the enemy army would get affected. So yeah, they're aging 5 years every turn. So this guy's 49, and next turn he will be incredibly old. This guy's already incredibly old because he's 65. So battle keeps going on. These old men are trying to win. Yeah, let's see. Here's a 28-year-old that didn't get affected. Here's a 67-year-old, 71-year-old, 74-year-old. Good times. Yeah, Nazca got routed, but these guys still have to suffer the effects of the spell until they can either shrug it off, die, or I think 100 turns pass. Maybe not even then. So, yep, they all got erased from existence. So, all of our guys did die. However, this is what happened to the enemy army. I think this is quite worth the trade. Only 3 of these granted 235 gold current priests, who by the way become mummies, so they're fine, they're at home, they're living their lives. And we did lose the items we gave them, but the enemy just had their entire army erased, so we still win. Plus, actually, notice how none of the enemy commanders survived, so they can't even pick up the items, and so the items are just lost to everybody. And that is it. I ran out of stuff I am showing for today. Hopefully you guys enjoy this, and hopefully I make another video at some point soon.